I think the measure of a great wrestler isn't just their wrestling ability, it's their ability to influence others, right? When you can point to somebody and say, so and so influenced a generation of talent to become pro wrestlers, to follow in their footsteps, you've done something right. Or if you can point to a generation of wrestlers that copied you in some way, they're emulating you in some way, right? You can say that you've done something right. Superstar Billy Graham was that guy. And he was finally the subject of a Dark Side of the Ring episode. I'm surprised it took this long. Billy Graham will never be mistaken as the best worker in wrestling, right? The best worker the business ever saw, because he wasn't. But if you ever wondered where Vince McMahon came up with the term WWE superstar, it was Superstar Billy Graham. Because in his mind, that was what a wrestler ought to look like. He had the physique, he had the charisma, he had the flashy outfits, he had the gift of gab on the microphone. He was exactly the kind of wrestler that Vince McMahon wanted to build his expansion off of when he went national. The only problem is, by that point, Billy was washed up. Vince would say, superstar, you came along 10 years too late. And he was right. If he was 10 years younger and came along in the mid-'80s, it would have been Billy Graham as world champion when Vince went national, not Hulk Hogan. Without Billy Graham, there is no Hulk Hogan. Without Billy Graham, there is no Jesse the Body Ventura. And you can go down the list. So many wrestlers blatantly copied him and borrowed from him, took from him. I don't think any two names, though, more so than Hulk and Jesse. Hogan went on to become one of the biggest stars in the history of the business. With the feather boas and the cupping of the ear and the posing, it was all taken from Graham. Like even stuff that, he may have taken from Austin Idol. Where do you think Austin Idol saw that? It all traces back to Superstar Billy Graham. So imagine how that must have made Billy Graham feel. Like he was way ahead of his time. His peak came 10 years too soon, and then his body began to break down on him. And I'm not going to lie, when he died in 2023, I was surprised because it felt like Billy Graham was constantly dying for 20 years before that. That's what it felt like. Always in and out of the hospital with health issues and infections and all kinds of problems, but he would always find a way to kick out until he didn't. It was good that they had his son and daughter sit down for this episode because they added insights about their relationship with their dad that added a dimension to the story that I think was needed. A lot of what they covered I already knew and it's been covered before, but the family element has never really been explored in this level of detail. And so that made it a little more interesting than I think it would have been otherwise. When I first started watching wrestling, I didn't know Billy Graham is one of the biggest names in the history of the business, and as a former world champion. To me, he was the jacked up old guy who managed Don Morocco and did commentary for some of the shows. I think he was on commentary for the first SummerSlam. He missed out on that whole era of pay-per-views and Saturday Night's Main Event on NBC and the LJN figures. I mean, my God, the merch money that man would have made if he was part of that golden era. He trained with Stu Hart. He got the Graham name because Dr. Jerry Graham, who was this bleach blonde heel at the time, Vince McMahon Jr.'s favorite wrestler, Dr. Jerry Graham, he was broke and figured they could bring in another Graham brother, and he pitched the idea to Billy, so that's how he got the Graham name. And he liked the Reverend Billy Graham, so that's where the name Billy came from. So you put the two together, you got Billy Graham. And that was his start in the business. He was training partners with Arnold Schwarzenegger. They used to work out together. One of the cool parts of the episode were Billy's kids showing old photos of Arnold holding them when they were babies at home. That's a pretty cool thing for them to have. He got the call to start working for Vince Sr. in 1975, and he wasn't even there a full 2 years before they put the world title on him. So Bruno Sammartino, he had been champion for a long time. And I mean a long time, as in 8 years. And that was just the first run with the belt. He got the belt back, and he held it for another 3.5 years. And so he was ready to drop it. And Vince Sr. had Bob Backlund in mind to be his next All-American babyface champion. But to transition the title off Bruno, it had to go to a heel. That's just the way it was back then. And Billy got the nod. Now, before he even won the title, Vince told him the day that he was going to win it, and he told him the day that he was going to lose it. It's all mapped out that far in advance. You talk about long-term booking. And so it happened April 30th, 1977. Billy Graham beat Bruno Sammartino to win the WWWF title at the Baltimore Civic Center. They chose Baltimore out of fear of what might happen if Bruno lost the belt at Madison Square Garden. Fans might start a riot. And along the way, something happened. Billy Graham became a huge draw. He was selling out arenas. He became the hottest attraction in wrestling, even though he was a heel. And so you would think that they have to keep the title on this guy, right? I mean, this is working. Business is booming. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Plus, as big of a heel as he was, you know that he would have been an even bigger babyface eventually. That's how Vince Jr. felt about it. But Vince Jr. was not yet in charge. And so Graham pitched the idea to Vince Sr. where Ivan Koloff would turn on him and would make Superstar a babyface, and the two of them would go on to feud for the championship, but Vince Sr. just never saw Graham as anything but a cocky heel. He didn't think the fans would buy him as a babyface, and so he stuck to his guns. Backlund's getting this belt, whether you like it or not. And so 11 months after he won it, so not even a full year, on February 20th, 1978, Billy Graham lost the title to Bob Backlund. Backlund won with the dreaded atomic drop. And according to his own family in the episode, that was the beginning of the end for superstar Billy Graham. He was never the same again after that because off camera, he was a very insecure man. He grew up, he was told by his father that he was worthless. You get told that enough times, you start to believe it, especially as a kid. So to him, holding that championship wasn't really a work. Like, it meant a lot to him. It validated him. And without it, it just destroyed his ego. And he couldn't understand why. With business so hot, why would you take the title off of me? Like, I don't understand it either. That was a very dumb decision. Steve Kern was interviewed in the episode. He used to be tag team partners with him, and he said Billy didn't win the belt. Somebody gave it to him. That part isn't real. But to Billy, it was. It was very real. So they got into Billy divorcing his wife after meeting his new love, Valerie, in an IHOP when she was 18 years old. And it was a year before he even told Valerie that he had a family. Good guy that Billy Graham was. Like, it's one thing to cheat on your wife or to tell your wife, and I'm not condoning, I'm just saying, it's one, like, husbands cheat on their wives. You hear about stories like this all the time, especially with fucking wrestlers back in the day. It's one thing to cheat on your wife or to tell your wife, I don't love you anymore, I want a divorce. And to do it in front of your daughter, no less, which is what he did. But to not even tell your new lady for a year that you have a family of your own, that you have kids, like they don't even exist. That's pretty fucked up. But Valerie stuck with him. She wasn't happy about it, but she stuck with him. Billy said a lot of fucked up things in his life, which I'm going to get into. But he was married to Valerie for almost 45 years. They interviewed her for the episode. They got into the usual dark side of the ring stuff about him getting addicted to pain pills, lots of overdoses in hotel rooms, medics being called. We've danced this dance and sang this song many times before with these episodes. The only thing missing was the dreaded eyeball being plucked out of someone's head. There were no eyeballs referenced in this episode. But Graham practically vanished not long after losing the title. A year later, he was running a lawn care business and he was wrestling here and there. So much so that Gorilla Monsoon had a weekly column in the Philadelphia Journal. I talked about this in my This Week in History segment many years ago. It was November 4th, 1981. The column, not the podcast. I'm not that old. But in his column, Monsoon announced that superstar Billy Graham had died of cancer in his hometown of Paradise Alley, Arizona, which came as news to Billy Graham, who was still very much alive. But as the story goes, Monsoon had heard a rumor that he died. I guess, he no longer had any contact with Billy Graham, and he heard this rumor, and so he printed it in his column. And when Graham came back in 1982, looking completely smaller and doing a kung fu type gimmick, and he did not draw well in Philly at all, probably because people thought he really was dead, and it was an imposter Billy Graham. But when he came back, even then, Monsoon never bothered printing a retraction. I guess he never got his journalism degree. They showed footage of him from his return with the karate gimmick, and he looked terrible. He could barely move. When I say he was a shell of his former self, he was a shell of his former self. And his body was just racked with injuries. His hip started giving out on him. I don't even think he lasted a year before he disappeared again. And it's right after that when Hulk Hogan comes back to the company and he gets the rocket strapped to him. Vince Jr., he couldn't have superstar Billy Graham, so he got his own version of superstar in the Hulkster. But he came back a few years later and he looked more like his old self, but old was the key word here. He was an old man by this point. He had a steel rod in his ankle. He had spinal issues, his hip. I mean, he was a mess from not only all the bumps, but all the steroids that he did. Like, I wouldn't say Billy Graham is the one person who ushered in the era of steroids in wrestling, but he was part of it. He was a very big part of it. And you live by the sword, you die by the sword. And when you abuse them the way that he did, there's a price to be paid for that. He sued Vince McMahon and the steroid manufacturers for all of his health issues stemming from his steroid use, which went nowhere because by his own admission, he started using steroids in the mid-60s, long before he ever wrestled. He testified for the prosecution during the Dr. Zahorian trial, but never went after Vince or Hogan, until Hogan went on the Arsenio Hall show and was asked about Billy Graham, and he threw him under the bus, which angered Billy Graham, and then he went public about how Hogan did steroids all the time. And then there was the infamous episode of the Phil Donahue show. And what a cast of characters they had on that stage. For whatever reason, Vince McMahon actually agreed to come on the show, and they had him sitting next to Dave Meltzer and his magnificent mullet. And Billy Graham was on that stage too, all the way at the end. So was Bruno. Bruno was there. And Graham went scorched earth, and he said that he injected Hogan himself, as Vince shot back and called him a liar. Billy's wife was in the audience and started crying because she says she knew that he was lying. He just had an axe to grind. He was very, very bitter. And Vince is one of the people that he was bitter towards. I remember in 93, WWE did a scathing piece on Billy Graham in their magazine, setting the record straight, in their words, about the Dr. Zahorian stuff. And this was very different than the normal piece that you would expect to see back then in the WWF magazine. 'Cause I had a subscription to the magazine starting in 92, so I would get them delivered to me every month. So I was big into the magazine, and this was like, what is this? I don't know what this was. But they absolutely buried Billy about how he sued them for over $1 million and they refused to pay, and how he was trying to extort them. They called him a high school dropout who never had a real job, how he left behind 2 children when he got married for the 4th or 5th time, claiming he owes child support. And when he came back, his matches were all shit, but he wanted the company to pay for a hip replacement. And so Vince McMahon, I guess out of the goodness of his heart, paid $30,000 for the operation just to help the guy out. And when he came back, they said they tried him out in different jobs, none of which he was any good at. And for 3 years of bad work, they said, he was paid $200,000. I told you they went scorched earth on this man. And then at the end, they promised to speak out about other people that had lied about them. Probably throughout the trial and all that stuff. But I don't think they ever did another feature again. They called it Now It's Our Turn. And I believe that was the only one that they ever did. Maybe Jerry McDevitt warned them that it wouldn't be such a good idea to do more of these. But I had to dig it out because I still have most of the old magazines. So I was able to dig it out, and it's the one from 93. I don't remember offhand which month. I don't have it in front of me now, but it's the one that has Lex Luger on the cover. He's doing a pose of some kind. That's the magazine that it's from. But you can see, like, there was a lot of acrimony between the two sides for many years. Now, for the record, his son does admit in the episode that his dad never paid child support. So his mom had to go work 2 or 3 jobs just to make sure they had food on the table. He was clearly very angry about not having a father figure in his life, so much so that when he turned 18, he had his last name legally changed from Coleman to his mother's maiden name. And he did it, he said, with the hope that it would get back to Billy and it would hurt his dad when he found out about it. His daughter said that she didn't didn't invite her father to her wedding, and instead she had her brother walk her down the aisle. As the years went on, his health continued to deteriorate. He got stage 4 liver disease. He was given 6 weeks to live until a 26-year-old girl named Katie died in a car accident, and she happened to be an organ donor. So Billy got her liver. He got a 26-year-old liver. And that liver gave him another 20 plus years on this earth. Although he had plenty of issues with that one too. He ended up with cirrhosis of the new liver, many years later. But he eventually made amends with Vince McMahon. He made amends with Hulk Hogan. Pat Patterson would never speak to him again. Because when Billy was bitter and he was lying about certain things like he did on the Donahue show, he admitted that the stuff he said about Pat Patterson, he made it all up. That was about Patterson and the ring boy stuff. Because Patterson had been accused of things during the sex scandal. And what was real and what wasn't, I don't know. Patterson was no angel. But when you have somebody admitting that they lied and they made stuff up about the guy, the problem is it muddies the waters. So if there were other stories being shared that may have been true, all of a sudden it's like, yeah, well, this person lied about him, so all of it must be lies, which of course is not true. But I bring this up because on that note, as I am recording this, the Ring Boy lawsuit, for those who don't know, there was a lawsuit a number of months ago brought against Vince and Linda McMahon and the company from, it might have been 5 is the number, but several ring boys who worked for the company many years ago. And so there was an update this week. The Ring Boy lawsuit was updated with even more claims of sexual abuse involving WWF staff in the 70s and 80s. And Pat Patterson is directly implicated by one of the new plaintiffs, who alleges that at a WWF show in July 14th, 1989, at the Baltimore Arena, he was told to stay in Patterson's hotel room, while the other ring boys were staying in Mel Phillips' room. Mel Phillips was a ring announcer for them for many years. He led the ring crew. He was a sexual predator. That's what he was. He's dead now, so fuck him. But he was a sexual predator. This new plaintiff claims he was given alcohol and Patterson played pornography on the TV and forced him to give Patterson oral sex, and Patterson performed oral sex on him. But that makes him the second person to implicate Pat Patterson directly. First one was Tom Cole, who worked as a ring boy for the company. Patterson died 5 years ago. 2 months after Patterson died, Tom Cole committed suicide. And his brother says he wasn't dealing well mentally with the fact that so many people, after Patterson died, were out there praising him and posting positive tributes to him. So while Billy Graham may have lied about the man, that doesn't mean that other people are too, which is just something that I think is worth mentioning here. Graham ended up hospitalized in 2023, and his kids said that they were used to hearing about him being in the hospital, but he always kicked out of it. This time was different, though, and his kids did go to see him, including his son, who also spoke to him on the phone and said that the last words Billy said to him were, "I love you." It got a little emotional there at the end, and I'm glad his kids ended up having some kind of relationship with him, if that's even the right word to use. But there's no excuse for the way that he treated them. The thing with Billy Graham, and I used to call him Super Schmuck whenever he was in the news, because he was always saying something stupid. He always came across as being a very transactional person. If you said nice things about him, or if he got a paycheck from WWE, he was very happy and he would sing your praises, and he would sing their praises. But if he didn't get what he wanted, he would turn on you in a heartbeat. He would say all kinds of horrible, nasty shit. He bashed WWE for years until he started getting a paycheck from them. And then all of a sudden, he changed his tune. They were paying him $2,000 a month at one point to do nothing. It basically covered the cost of his medications after his liver transplant. But when they eventually let him go, as they sometimes do, they cut people. It was probably one of their cost-cutting phases. They cut him and I think a few other people. He turned on them again. Like, it was always whichever way the wind blows with him. He once criticized Linda McMahon when she ran for Senate the first time about how she allowed racy, inappropriate content on their shows during the Attitude Era. And then later he apologized to her and offered to be a spokesperson for her campaign. Like, I remember he had a GoFundMe. And because, again, all the health issues and everything that he was having and the hospital stays, but he had a GoFundMe. And Chris Jericho actually donated to it, as he does with a lot of wrestler GoFundMe pages. But what's notable about that is that Graham went off on Jericho, like years earlier, Graham went off on Jericho at Eddie Guerrero's funeral. I know Billy was friends with Eddie, but so was Jericho, obviously. Billy was officiating the service and gave everybody time cues. Jericho may have gone over his allotted time, and he made a remark, joking about it that Graham didn't like. And he just, at the funeral, like right there, he just exploded on him. And I think it may have stemmed from that. I don't know. It's possible Jericho, he may have said something else about him years later. But for that, later in a shoot interview, Billy Graham said that Jericho would bleed to death on his own blood, which doesn't make any sense, but that's what he said. And he would burn in hell. He said he would spit on Jericho's grave. And for that, years later, Chris Jericho dropped $1,500 on this man's GoFundMe. He's a bigger man than I would have been. But Billy used to post blogs on his Facebook page. And then one day, I did a whole segment about this. One day he said that, it's been something like 10 hours or 11 hours since anybody donated to my GoFundMe. I've been watching it. And to him, this meant that all of his Facebook fans didn't give a shit about him. And he was fucking done with begging them for nickels and dimes. So he was going to start blocking people to make way, because he had like 5,000 people. It must have been his personal Facebook profile. I think you have a limit on there of 5,000. Maybe they've upped it. I don't know. I know they used to, because I had people waiting in queue. But he's talking about how I've got 5,000 people just waiting in queue to be on my Facebook page and join my Facebook, and I'm going to block all the non-givers. The guy was a maniac. Fucking Kofi Kingston. What did Kofi ever do to anybody? Kofi Kingston, after he won the title from Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania, Billy Graham, in one of his blogs, said that Kofi should take steroids and put on 50 pounds of muscle. And when he got called out for saying that, he doubled down and he said, I didn't say he should abuse them, only that he should take them. This is from a man whose body was ravaged from years of steroid use. I love, by the way, how Kofi, he just won the WWE Championship. So it wasn't that he needed to take the drugs to be successful. He just needed to take them to get bigger because, I don't know, I guess he wasn't successful enough for the superstar. So, look, you take the good with the bad with these people. He was very vocal about a lot of people and a lot of things later in his life. I covered a lot of them on my show. It's part of his story. It's part of what I think about when I think about Billy Graham. But I will never deny his influence and his place in the history of the wrestling business. He was more influential than most. And when you consider the names that were influenced by him, like Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes, and what they all went on to accomplish in wrestling, you realize just how important a figure he really was. That, more than anything he ever did inside the ring, is the legacy of superstar Billy Graham.